In most teams, 70% of the impact comes from 30% of the work. You see it in daily tasks, in budgets, and in product roadmaps. Companies routinely put 70% into the known and 30% into the experiments, and that simple split quietly decides what survives and what gets shelved. It feels safe to pour everything into what already works. But when you do, you stop creating options. That 30% is the space for new customers, fresh ideas, and the occasional breakout feature, like the small retailer that tried one bold Anno Domini test with a tiny budget and doubled a new channel's conversion. The rule isn't a formula written in stone. It's a risk and reward switch. Too much on the steady side makes you brittle. Too much on the wild side burns runway. So the 70-30 balance tames variance while leaving room for upside. Most advice just names the ratio and moves on. This short piece shows the signs that tell you when to tilt the split: rising churn, flat growth, low experiment hit rates, and gives concrete cues for nudging towards 60-40 or 80-20, so the choice is based on evidence, not habit. Origins and everyday examples of the 70-30 rule. Many planners and everyday people lean on simple splits when choices feel overwhelming. The 70-30 split is one such heuristic. It's a practical compromise that borrows the intuition behind the Pareto idea, where a small share of causes often produces a large share of results, but softens the proportions into something easier to act on. It didn't appear because of a single law. Rather, it grew out of the need for round, actionable numbers that balance opposing goals: growth versus safety, focus versus upkeep, core work versus exploration. Because people prefer memorable rules, the 70-30 format stuck in budgeting rooms and meeting agendas alike. Balancing risk and return is a constant tension in finance. Many advisors and individual investors use a roughly 70% of equities and 30% of fixed income or cash allocation as a middle ground portfolio for moderate risk tolerance. For example, an investor seeking long-term growth might keep the bulk of savings in stocks to capture market upside, while holding 30% in bonds or cash to cushion volatility and provide liquidity during drawdowns. That cushion matters because when markets fall, having some stable assets reduces the chance of forced selling, which in turn preserves the growth engine of the portfolio. Workdays are full of interruptions and priorities that pull in different directions. A common productivity take is to aim for about 70% of time on high-value, focused work and the remaining 30% on meetings, email, and administrative tasks. A product manager might block mornings for strategy, research, and writing, then leave afternoons for syncs and stakeholder calls. The logic is simple. Deep work yields outsized results, but administrative demands still exist. Carving out most of the best hours for concentrated tasks raises output while reserving time to keep the machine running. Household choices and business priorities mirror the same trade-off pattern. Nutrition coaches often emphasize that diet drives most weight change outcomes and thus talk about food control accounting for the larger share of success, with exercise playing a complementary role. Small, concrete examples illustrate this. Swapping a soda for water cuts hundreds of calories a week, while an extra 30-minute jog burns fewer calories than that on a consistent basis. In sales and account management, teams frequently allocate the bulk of relationship time to the top-performing customers and use the remaining time to cultivate new leads, because protecting revenue from core clients stabilizes cash flow and frees room to experiment. The broader reason the 70-30 split keeps being used is straightforward. People want a manageable rule that captures diminishing returns, spreads risk, and enforces a stopgap for the less glamorous but necessary activities, balancing routine gains and creative risk. When a team tightens processes to ship faster, reliability tends to improve. That steady cadence cuts out errors, reduces rework, and makes customer expectations match reality, but it also builds momentum that makes novel experiments harder to justify. Engineers and product managers begin triaging toward predictable wins like bug fixes and small feature polish instead of ambitious prototypes. For example, a support-heavy software group that responds to tickets every sprint will steadily lower downtime and complaint rates. Yet that same focus often leaves no slot for a designer to prototype a radically different onboarding flow. The cause is simple. Routine work returns visible, short-term gains, so it captures scarce time and budget, which in turn reduces the chance that less certain, longer-term bets get funded. Carving out deliberate space for risky, exploratory work can feel like gambling because most experiments won't land, yet a few can change product direction in ways routine work never will. It's messy. A designer testing 3 divergent UI concepts may only find one worthwhile, but that one concept can multiply conversion rates in ways incremental tweaks never will. When an advertising team runs a small pilot of an unusual channel or tone, the pilot might flop, but a single successful pilot can open a new audience and pay back many quiet months of optimization work. The effect here is that occasional, protected risk-taking creates optionality. It increases the range of future paths a team can pursue, even while most attempts fail. Finding the right mix means creating guardrails that let routine gains compound while keeping experiments cheap and informative. A common pattern is to set firm, measurable goals for operational work and separate, time-boxed windows for exploration so that the two don't cannibalize one another. This reduces the political pressure to kill risky efforts for immediate metrics. For instance, a marketing group might reserve a recurring slot for rapid A/B tests that run for short durations, ensuring core campaigns continue to perform while new messages get a fair shot. The causal chain is clear. Predictable processes produce steady results and free cognitive bandwidth, and lightweight experiments expand strategic options without jeopardizing that stability. People-level incentives and cultural cues determine whether that balance sticks. Teams that celebrate learnings from failed pilots and archive them as reusable insights encourage more experimentation without eroding routine performance. Managers who emphasize learning metrics, like hypotheses tested or time to insight, alongside delivery metrics create room for creative risk, because teams can justify experiments as investments in knowledge rather than distractions. A creative agency that publicly documents unsuccessful concepts in a shared repo often sees more daring proposals surface, because contributors know failure won't end their careers but will inform the next, better attempt. In short, the interaction between operational discipline and structured experimentation produces both steady improvements and the rare leaps that redefine what steady looks like. When the 70-30 split fails or misleads, a neat 70-30 split looks like clarity on a spreadsheet, but that clarity can be deceptive. It's tempting to treat the rule as a default because it reduces decision friction. For someone running a small seasonal business, for example, setting aside 70% for operating costs and 30% for growth can be disastrous when a quiet quarter hits. Cash flow timing and tax obligations change the math, and the rigid split doesn't account for the lag between revenue and receipts. What seems balanced in theory becomes brittle in practice when timing and volatility matter. People lean on the split in investing because it promises diversification, and that promise breaks down when assets move together. Correlations between asset classes can climb during market stress, so the 30% of cushion you expected from fixed income or safer assets may shrink when you need it most. An investor assuming bonds will always soften equity losses can be misled if credit spreads widen or inflation erodes real returns. The intended safety simply isn't guaranteed. That mismatch between expectation and reality is a common reason portfolios that follow rule-of-thumb allocations underperform bespoke plans. There's also the human side where treating 70-30 as a mandate creates bad behavior. A product team told to spend 70% of time building features and 30% on customer research may start stacking the schedule to hit quotas rather than responding to real user feedback. The result is technical debt and features nobody asked for. Likewise, a household that automatically directs 30% of income to savings without factoring in irregular expenses or emergency buffers can quickly find itself forced to liquidate investments or take on costly credit. Finally, the split can obscure what needs more nuanced measurement: risk, timing, and value. Managers who measure productivity by the proportion of time allocated rather than outcomes can miss the fact that some tasks require concentrated bursts or long incubation, not neat percentages. For instance, dedicating only a fixed share of resources to quality assurance or security because of a rule can cause problems that are far costlier down the road than any immediate efficiency gains. The practical takeaway is simple. The split can be a starting point, but it becomes misleading when it substitutes for ongoing assessment of context, risk, and changing priorities. Practical ways to tailor the rule to real life. Housing and commuting often take up the bulk of monthly budgets. And when essentials already claim most of a paycheck, the textbook 70-30 split for needs versus wants or savings needs a tweak to fit real circumstances. For example, renters in expensive cities may find it more realistic to treat 70% as a floor for essentials and then subdivide the remaining 30% into short-term flexibility and debt reduction, which lowers default risk and reduces stress. Small changes add up. Shifting a few discretionary dollars toward high-interest debt lowers monthly obligations later, and that makes a modified ratio work over time. quarterly goals push many people to prioritize immediate outputs over skill growth. In practical terms, allocating roughly 70% of working hours to role-critical responsibilities and about 30% to learning, experiments, or side projects gives a rhythm that preserves performance while producing new capabilities. For instance, a software engineer who spends 3 days on sprint work and 1 day on a pet project often builds prototypes that improve future sprints, which in turn raises velocity. That trade-off reduces surprises. When new tools or methods emerge, the 30% of buffer lets teams test before scaling, decreasing costly refactors. Creative work suffers when polishing eats into discovery. A useful adaptation is to let 70% of creative energy feed the primary project and 30% fuel exploration and play, which replenishes ideas without derailing deadlines. A freelance photographer who books most of a week for client shoots but saves a weekend for personal series tends to expand their portfolio and attract higher fee clients. Small experiments become bridges. The side work often surfaces a technique or visual language that improves paid assignments, and that outcome makes the initial time investment pay off. Teams and organizations face a constant tension between hitting near-term KPIs and building future options. Allocating roughly 70% of budget and staffing to sustaining the core business while keeping about 30% for pilot projects or capacity for fast follow-ups helps avoid both stagnation and chaos. As a practical example, a 5-person product team that reserves 1 person for prototypes can iterate on new features quickly without derailing customer-facing deliveries. That arrangement lowers risk. When a prototype succeeds, the team can scale it into the core stream, so the 30% functions as a controlled innovation pipeline rather than a distraction. Psychological and social forces that shape the ratio. Many managers divide resources so core work gets most attention while experiments get a smaller share. That split often feels like a compromise between preserving steady results and making room for novelty, because people naturally weigh losses more heavily than gains. For example, a freelance designer might spend most weeks on client deadlines and carve out a few hours for speculative side projects, protecting income while still testing new ideas. This tendency to protect what's already working drives the 70-30 intuition. Keep the majority on the reliable path and relegate risk to a controlled minority. People also hate juggling too many priorities. When attention is limited, favoring familiar tasks reduces decision friction and lowers the risk of paralysis. So teams assign most capacity to known processes and save a slice for exploration. In practical terms, product teams often plan core features first and set aside a portion of sprint capacity for experiments or bugs, because cognitive load affects execution quality. That's why the 70-30 split often emerges as a satisfying shortcut. It's not optimal in theory, but it's easier to manage in practice. Colleagues read allocations as signals. How much you publicly commit to innovation versus maintenance sends a message about what you value, and social audiences react accordingly. A marketing group that dedicates a minority of budget to brand experiments while putting the bulk into performance channels tells partners and investors that short-term returns are prioritized, even if long-term learning still matters. The visible split reduces ambiguity and helps align external expectations with internal priorities. Negotiations and fairness norms push the ratio into place too. When people bargain over time, money, or credit, an asymmetric split functions as an anchor and as a perceived fair division that balances stability with opportunity. Co-founders deciding who handles operations and who pursues new markets often agree to an unequal division of responsibilities to reflect different risk appetites and comparative advantages, which lowers conflict and clarifies accountability. The result is a social equilibrium where psychological comfort, information limits, and signaling needs all converge to make the 70-30 shape feel natural and usable. Ever notice the 70-30 rule can sound like a vague rule of thumb? It's actually a practical shortcut. Put 70% into what reliably moves the needle so you keep momentum, and use 30% to experiment and learn, which creates a steady stream of small wins that can compound into bigger changes. Most of us juggle time, bills, and limited energy every week. When you commit 70% of your budget or schedule to essentials, rent, core work, major clients, you stop firefighting, and when you deliberately set aside 30% for side projects or small bets, you lower the cost of discovery and give new ideas room to breathe. It feels risky to give up a chunk of your resources. Try imagining a freelancer who spends 70% of their week on billable work and 30% on building a niche product. The immediate cash flow keeps them afloat, and the focused experiments can produce a marketable product without risking the whole business. If this clicked for you and you want more practical breakdowns without the noise, staying connected makes it easy to catch the next video. Future episodes will show concrete spreadsheets and real-world ratios so you can see how small reallocations change outcomes over months. Change is slow and messy. Next time we'll walk through a household budget, a solo creator schedule, and a startup runway so you can test one small tweak, see the cause and effect, and decide whether that 70-30 split should shift for you. First, I'd love to hear what you try and what actually moves the needle.